Well, good morning, everybody. It's good to have you with us today. Time to begin our Bible class. I'm going to start off with passing around the attendance sheets, so I'll give this to around. There you go. Well, very glad to have you with us today. We have the Bible study of Haggai today. If you have your scriptures with you, we'll be looking at the major message of the prophet Haggai. So, looking forward to this study with you. There's some background I'm going to need to share with you before we get to this book. It's not a long book. It's not the shortest book. And Dennis took care of the shortest one last week. But this week we're going to look at Haggai, and then after that Zechariah. Before we begin our class, let's have a prayer together. I see some folks coming in, and then we'll start. Okay, let's begin with a prayer. Our dear Father in heaven, we're so grateful for our study through your word, and we always want to put your word, your teachings, your truth foremost in our studies and our guidance to know how to live, because those are the instructions you gave us. We thank you for the prophets who lived long ago. Most of them sacrificed their lives, not only just because of their physical and lives or their livelihood, but also their whole life being persecuted sometimes. We thank you for this study of Haggai. We thank you for the courage that these prophets had when they stood up and pronounced your word to people who didn't many times want to hear your word, but they prophesied and told about your will in spite of many times rejection. Dear God, help us not to be rejectful people of your word, to always listen to you as you call out to us through your teachings as well. We thank you for this great study through Haggai, and we thank you for his life and the good lessons we can learn from him. In Jesus' name, amen. Haggai. Well, if you look on your screen, you can see on our chart that we've been going back to as we go through this study where he lives in the timeline. Haggai came after the captivity. So if you look at the chart up there, everything that you see over to the left is the prophets who lived before the Israelites and the Jews and the Judah went into captivity. And so most of them lived at that period of time, 10. But only 3 lived, prophesied after the captivity. And it's very, very important to know when the prophets prophesied, because that will channel your interpretation of what they say because of the history and the time in which they lived. Because if you don't know when they lived and the circumstances in which they lived, you can be confused about when is their prophecy going to take place. Was it going to be when Jesus comes, if they're talking about something in the future? Were they talking about things that are happening in their lifetime? Or sometimes people get to thinking that maybe the prophets are talking about something that hasn't taken place even yet. But knowing the history, the background, will help understand a lot of these directions that people go and solve a lot of confusion. So what I'm going to do, first of all, is do a little background information about Haggai, because we're going into a different era of the Jewish history. So going back and reviewing a few things we've already talked about, you notice that the arrow I just put up on the screen showing the Assyrian conquering Israel way back earlier in our studies. And this was the Assyrian nation that, a map of it as they invaded into Israel. They conquered the Israelites, the northern kingdom, but they did not completely conquer the southern kingdom. The only reason they couldn't, because God prevented the Assyrians from conquering Jerusalem, and they had to go back home because God fought for the Jews in Jerusalem. But Assyria did take care of the northern kingdom. That is, they took those people and dispersed them. And so there, the northern kingdom was taken away. But we're going to be looking at, as you see the circle on the map or the chart, that there's a big area that is full of information that I want to cover, because we're now, as I said, entering a different era of the Jewish history. We've been talking about before the captivity into Babylon, but now we're going to be talking about the prophets that lived after that. So we see here there is a timeline. If you look at the Assyrian, their kingdom came to an end around 612 BC, and that's because the Babylonian Empire took over and conquered them. And so now the Assyrians are no longer in existence, because Babylon now is the country taking over that. So now we see the Assyrians are gone from the history around 612 BC. Now, what does Babylon do? They come in and they are successful in conquering Judah, because God allowed them to do that. And the Jews in Jerusalem and Judea had become so sinful, worshiping idols, being evil to one another. And God sent all these prophets. Look at them. There's Haggai, Zephaniah, Jeremiah, Isaiah, and all the others that we see before them, warning Judah, straighten up, come back to God. And we know that God is slow to anger, as we see in Exodus chapter 34. But that doesn't mean he doesn't come to anger. Eventually the wrath of God comes, and that's when finally he let Babylon come and conquer Judah and take those people into captivity. And so Judah was now taken into the captivity which was prophesied would take place, and they were saying, if you don't straighten up, you're going to go to captivity by Babylon. You'll be in captives for 70 years, according to the prophets. So now we see that takes place. For 70 years, these Jews are now captive in Babylon. By the way, if you were going to be captive by either Assyria or Babylon, you would rather be captured by Babylon. The Assyrians were cruel to their captives, torturing them to death in many cases. And if you weren't tortured to death, you were either in very strict and dire slavery, or they sold you to a foreign country. But the Babylons were more merciful to their captives. They didn't do the horrible things that the Assyrians did. They would let their captives live, especially if you were of good talent. Mentally, physically, they would put you in prominent positions. And who's a good example of that went into captivity, and he was put into a very prominent, in fact, several did. Daniel, yes. So Daniel was one of these Israelites who went into captivity, and then he was put into the royal court, along with 3 of his friends, who? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And so we know the story of that. Yes, Patricia.
Now, Israel was taken captive by Assyria, right?
Right.
Judah taken captive by Babylon.
That's exactly right.
So, do you think possibly because Israel never had a good king, after the divided kingdom, all of their kings were so evil, but Judah did have quite a few good kings. You think maybe that's why God said, I'm going to let those horrible Assyrians have the northern kingdom, but I'm going to let Babylon, that's kinder, have Judah?
That is a very good observation, Patricia. And this is being recorded for people at home, so I'm going to repeat some of the things as best I can. Patricia just made a very good point. And that is the northern kingdom was ruled by very evil kings. In fact, I don't know of a good king that ever came to the northern kingdom. And because their leadership was evil and the people were so evil, Patricia was pointing out that maybe that's why God let the evil nation, the one that was horrible to their prisoners, take that kingdom. But the southern kingdom had several good kings. Josiah and others like that were good kings. They had some evil kings, but they had sporadic good kings as well, which would turn the people back around and get them back right. And then another bad king would come along, and then they would go back to their idol worship. So maybe, as Patricia is saying, that God let the Babylons, which was a kinder captive people, take Judah because there was more good in the southern kingdom. But eventually, they didn't completely come back to God as God warned them. So they did go into captivity too. Very good observation. Thank you.
It looked like it was almost going to happen with Hezekiah. You mentioned that. Of course, he took it to the Lord. The people repented. The Assyrians went back to Nineveh. 185,000 of them were killed.
That's very good, Bob. So Hezekiah was one of the good kings of Judah. And that's when Nebuchadnezzar the Assyrians, he was the king of the Assyrians, surrounded Jerusalem and was going to try to conquer Jerusalem. But because Hezekiah, the king at that time, was a good king, God spared Jerusalem. And so, and then God wiped out their army, and Sennacherib, Sennacherib was the king of the Assyrians, went back home. And when he got home, he was assassinated. And so that took care of him. But Nebuchadnezzar was the king of the Babylons.
Which was prophesied.
Which
happened to Sennacherib.
That's right. And so that was even prophesied about what Sennacherib was going to happen to him. So all of this is just, exactly the way God, he took care of he was in control of the whole situation. We got to keep that in mind. So these nations didn't just come in on their own. There was a plan that God had because the way these people were acting, the way the Jews, that is, were acting. If they had stayed good and stayed straight, their captivity would never have taken place. So here is the map of Babylon. And as you can see, they took over Assyria, and it goes all the way from the Persian Gulf around they call the Crescent, the Fertile Crescent, comes down into Palestine area, into Egypt, and all the way down south to what is called in the Bible Cush, which is today Ethiopia and those areas. So they really expanded their territory pretty wide. Here's an artist's rendition of the captivity of the Jews by the Babylonians. When the Babylonians did come into Jerusalem, they did destroy the city and the temple completely and took the people captive. Now, if you can look really carefully, you can see a man, one of the captives, he's in the circle now, and he's carrying something in his arms. And as he's being taken out of Jerusalem. What do you think that is that's in his arms? It's kind of a long, slender, tube-looking thing. It's a scroll. So the artist here was depicting that this may be one of the priests being taken captive, but fortunately, they saved the scrolls from Moses, those that were being copied and recopied, so that those would not be lost. So fortunately, the scrolls from the Old Testament times were taken and saved and not destroyed. If those had been destroyed, we would not have Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, and such. They would be gone if they had not rescued the scrolls during this captivity. Here are some also artist renditions of the Babylon. It was this is the capital, beautiful town, according to the archaeological discoveries. There was one of the 7 wonders of the world was the great gardens of Babylon. And there's the great gate that goes into Babylon that has been, and this is the gates that's now in a British museum. Anybody here been to the British Museum and seen these gates? Can you tell us about that, Dennis?
It's been too long ago.
Too long ago? All right. So anyway, it's very high, very ornate, as you can see. Let's just give you an idea what kind of town or city that the captives were being taken to. Here's another rendition of the capital with the gates, and also up there in the top right-hand corner is the gardens that I mentioned a while ago, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Here's Daniel talking to Nebuchadnezzar as he's interpreting one of his dreams. This particular dream was about the statue, and so this was taking place during the 70 years. Who does this represent? Yeah, that's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace, and some, as Nebuchadnezzar says, and I see someone with them, it looks like the Son of God. So, of course, they spared from being burned alive by this, and they came out unscathed from this fiery furnace. All this takes place during the Babylonian captivity, and you can read about that in Daniel's book, and also the book of Ezekiel, which we consider the major prophets. And recognize this one. This was now when Darius was now king over this area, and Daniel was thrown into the lion's den. Darius the king did not want Daniel thrown in the lion's den. He liked Daniel, but Darius was tricked. Can somebody tell us about how he was tricked to get Daniel thrown into the lion's den?
Well, they came up with a scheme where that anyone who was worshiping any other god other than the one that Darius designated, then that he would be punished and killed. And so it was really, as these things are many times, it was an ulterior motive because they were jealous of Daniel, and they knew that Daniel was going to continue to worship his God, and it was a way to get Daniel out of the way, who was growing more and more in authority. So there's a bit of a power play going on. And I think Darius realized what was going on after the fact, and of course the people that were behind the scheme wind up getting thrown into the lion's den, and things don't go quite as well for them.
Absolutely, Bobby. Boy, you described that very beautifully. I know there's people at home couldn't hear everything, so I'll just really quickly summarize I wish we had our remote mic going around so we could hear those things. So Daniel's enemies tricked Darius, depends on which way you pronounce his name, King Darius, to sign a decree that you can pray to nobody but to the king for a certain amount of time, for certain months. But of course, Daniel was not going to be praying to the king. He'll continue praying to Jehovah. And so he stood at his window, or wherever he was at the same time, every time, and prayed to God. And that the enemies were spying on him. And sure enough, they caught him praying to God instead of to the king. They took Daniel before King Darius and said, "This man has now disobeyed your order." Darius then realized that he made a mistake. "Oh no, I didn't mean that to get my loyal servant Daniel killed." But they said, "You signed that Medes and the Persian law, and that means you cannot break it. Even the king cannot break if you put the law to the Medes and Persians." I had a professor one time in college at Harding say that, and I'm going to give you here's the law of my class, and it's the law of the Medes and Persians. Don't you try to break it. Well, and it was an Old Testament class that we were having too. So anyway, this was, King Darius couldn't even change this law and save his friend Daniel. So Daniel was thrown into the lion's den, and overnight, King Darius could not sleep. But that next morning he got up, ran straight to the lion's den and hollered down, "Daniel, is your God whom you serve able to save you?" And Darius waited, and up from the pit came a voice that said, "Yes, Darius, my God has saved me." And then Darius had Daniel pulled out of the lion's den and pit and threw the enemies that tricked him into their pit. And it says even before they hit the ground, the lions were chewing on their bones. So that was how fast that all took place. So here we see, back to our chart, the 70 years of captivity. The Assyrian Empire is gone. But now, let's see. Another empire comes in and takes over the Babylonians, and that's the Medes and Persians. And so now another country takes place, and over this country. Now look how big this map is compared to the first one. Notice this map has this much territory. Look how much the Medes and Persians take over, a much wider territory. And who was the king of the Medes and Persians when they came into taking over Babylon? Cyrus the king. And so now he takes over, and Medes and Persians conquer Babylon. Now this is all during the 70-year captivity of the Israelites. Now the Babylon empire is gone. Here's some remnants that is of the Babylon town. This is all that's left, ruins like this. And you know what country this would be in now? If you would go to there to visit, what country would you have to go to? Excuse me? Iraq. Yes, that's right. Oh, did I say? Oh, yeah, I put that up there. I forgot I did that. Big hint. right in front of you. And so now, Cyrus, though, as predicted by the Old Testament prophets before the captivity, was going to release the people and let them go back home. So here's an artist's rendition of the Israelites being released so they can go back to Jerusalem. So now they go back down to their land, all the Jews who wanted to. Now, not every Jew went back, and they went back in several waves. And you can read Ezra and Nehemiah, their stories, and they tell you about the coming back to their promised land. And so all these countries here were wiped out by the Babylonian invasion, but now the Jews get to come back to their home. And when they did come back, 2 leaders were appointed. One was Zerubbabel as a governor, and the other one was a high priest named Joshua. There are several Joshuas in the Bible, so this is not the Joshua, of course, that came after the Exodus, but this is another Joshua many years later, 6 centuries later, in fact. So this was a high priest. So this is when you come back to Jerusalem and back to your homeland, your homes are not there anymore. The city's not there. The temple is gone. So when they came back, this is probably what they saw. Man, our land is gone. Our cities are gone. There's no crops. There's nothing. So when they came back, there was nothing left. So the Jews set out, first of all, to build their own homes. And then they started planting their crops. And now they're back home after the 70 years of captivity and coming back in several waves of coming back. And they build their homes. They start planting their crops. And then they just sat around. This is where Haggai comes in because there's a problem. And that is the Jews were not rebuilding God's temple. They were just leaving it in ruins. And because they were leaving it in ruins, that was not pleasing to God. So now we have Haggai. Let's go now to what Haggai's message are to these Jews who had built their homes, they have planted their crops, and now they're just sitting down. Let's see what he has to say. So King Cyrus lets the Jews go back home, and here's a little tidbit about this. Around 576 to 530 BC is when he reigned. Then King Darius continues to let the Jews come back home around 550 to 486 BC. Now notice there's a little overlapping of the 2 kings, Cyrus and Darius. Darius was actually King Cyrus's son-in-law. Darius married Cyrus's daughter. And it's believed that Cyrus because Cyrus had no sons, he allowed King Darius to take over, and took over during the last part of his reign. So there's the Cyrus and Darius. So Haggai is going to mention Darius in his readings. And then, of course, we talked about Darius with the lines in Daniel chapter 6. So we start now with our reading. Haggai says he receives God's message during the 2nd year of Darius' reign. Let's read now Haggai, after now this background information. Let's look at verses 1 through 6. In the 2nd year of King Darius, on the 1st day of the 6th month, the word of the Lord came through the prophet Haggai to Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and to Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest. This is what the Lord Almighty says. These people say, the time has not come for the Lord's house to be built. Then the word of the Lord came through the prophet Haggai. Is it time for yourselves to be living in your paneled houses while the house is in ruins? Now the house is referring to the temple. Now this is what the Lord God says. Get off your lazy tough and build my temple. Well, actually he didn't say it quite in those words, but that's the message. He's telling these people, get up and start building my temple. Look what he says. Give careful thoughts of your ways. You have planted much, but there is harvest little. You eat, but never have enough. You drink, but never have your fill. You put on clothes, but they are not warm. You earn wages, but only put them in a purse that have holes in it. So he's saying here, the reason that you're not really prospering like you should is because you have not built my temple. I'm not blessing your crops and your clothes and everything that you need to live because you're not getting up and finishing the task. So let's now look at verses 7 through 15, and we're going to see, so the Jews get up to work to build the temple. This is what the Lord Almighty says. Give careful thought to your ways. Go up to the mountains and bring down timber and build the house. Of course, again, that's referring to the temple. So that I may take pleasure in it and be honored, says the Lord. You expected much, but see, it turned out to be little. What you brought home, I blew away. Why? Declares the Lord Almighty. Because of my house, which remains a ruin, while each of you is busy with your own house. Therefore, because of you, the heavens have withheld their dew, and the earth its crops. I called for a drought on the fields and the mountains, on the grain and the new wine, the oil and whatever the ground produces, on men and cattle, and on the labor of your hands. So, why were the people experiencing this drought, according to this? Why? They weren't building the temple. God was bringing this upon the people. So they said, God says, if you would get straightened up, if you want your life to be good again and have your good crops and your good food and your good clothes, start building the temple. So that's what they start doing. So let's go down to verse 13 and following. Then Haggai, the Lord's messenger, let's go to verse 12 first. Then Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, Joshua, son of Jehozadak, the high priest, and the whole remnant of the people obeyed the voice of the Lord their God and the message of the prophet Haggai, because the Lord their God had sent him, and the people feared the Lord. Then Haggai, the Lord's messenger, gave this message of the Lord to the people. I am with you, declares the Lord. So the Lord stirred up the spirit of Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, and governor of Judah, and the spirit of Joshua, son of Jehozadak, the high priest, and the spirit of the whole remnant of the people. So the Spirit of God is stirring them up, as he just says. They came and began to work on the house of the Lord Almighty, their God, on the 24th day of the 6th month of the 2nd year of King Darius. So now they're building the temple, getting it going. But now we go to chapter 2, some of the older Jews who were alive before the captivity started complaining that this temple that you're building is not looking like the old temple that we remember seeing before the captivity. It's not as glorious as that first temple. So he's looking at that, and they're saying, and now remember, these Jews had been in captivity for 70 years. So how old must these complainers must be? At least 80. If they were 10 years old when they went into captivity, they would have been 10 years old seeing the old temple before it was destroyed. Now, 70 years later, they've been in their 80s, some 90s probably, and they're remembering what the old temple looked like. Remember, the old temple was the Temple of Solomon, and it was a gorgeous temple. And so here in Haggai chapter 2, verses 1 through 3, it says that there is a complaint by the older people because the temple wasn't looking as beautiful as the first one. So look at what he says here in verses 1 through 3. On the 21st day of the 7th month, the word of the Lord came through the prophet Haggai. Speak to Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and governor of Judah, and Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest, and all the remnant of the people. Ask them, who of you is left who saw the house in its former glory? In other words, who are you, those of you who saw that former temple? How does it look to you now? Does it not seem to you like nothing? So now he's saying, you don't like the way this temple looked. Does it just seem like nothing to you compared to the first one? So the glory of the first temple, let's look at that for just a second. If you have your scriptures, you want to turn back to 1 Kings chapter 6 and verse, we're going to look at a few verses here. And I'm not going to read all of this, but we're just going to read this is just a description of the first temple. And this is why the people were concerned about why the new temple was looking, why the second was looking. Go to 1 Kings chapter 6, verse 19, and I'll read this out loud. It says, this is Solomon building the first temple, the one that the older people could remember. He prepared an inner sanctuary within the temple to set the ark of the covenant of the Lord there. The inner sanctuary was 20 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, 20 cubits high. He overlaid the inside with pure gold, and he also overlaid the altar of cedar. Solomon covered the inside of the temple with pure gold, and he extended gold chains across the front of the inner sanctuary, which was overlaid with gold. So he overlaid the whole interior with gold. He also overlaid with gold the altar that belonged to the inner sanctuary. What keeps coming up in this decoration? Gold. It was beautiful. This temple was just gorgeous. Let's get now to verse 29. Here's more descriptions of the walls of the temple. Now the walls all around the temple, in both inner and outer rooms, he carved cherubim, palm trees, and open flowers. They also covered the flowers in both the inner and outer rooms of the temple with, guess what? Gold. For the entrance of the inner sanctuary, he made doors of olive wood and 5-sided jambs. And on the 2 olive wood doors, he carved cherubim and palm trees and open flowers, and overlaid the cherubim and palm trees with beaten gold. In the same way, he made 4-sided jambs of olive wood in the entrance of the main hall. He also made 2 pine doors, each having 2 leaves that turned in sockets. He carved cherubim and palm trees and open flowers on them, and overlaid them with gold, hammered with with gold hammered evenly over the carvings. And he built the inner courtyard and the 3 courses of dressed stone and 1 course of trimmed cedar beams. Now this is just a partial description of this first temple. So now the Jews are building the second temple, but there's a problem. They don't have all this much gold. They don't have all this beautiful art that the first temple had. And the Jews had to have some gold. We're going to see that they did have some gold in it, but they didn't have all the elaborate ones that Solomon had with his riches. You have something? So you can have all the gold in the world, but if you didn't have the skill, how would you know how to use it? Is what you're saying? Yeah.
I couldn't help but think it said in Scripture that silver was counted as nothing
Yes.
So much gold.
They were in Solomon's days, they were so rich with gold and beautiful gems and stones. Silver was considered nothing. Yeah, in Solomon's day, it was a rich, rich country. But when the Jews came back from captivity, they came back with very little.
Where did they find that gold? Where did they find
Which one? The Jews that came back?
No, for the temple, where did they find the gold? But Solomon, he had taxes that he placed on people, and it was like 666 talents of gold from the various kingdoms that were subject to him. He got every year. He was leasing out properties and getting gold, and then he's also through trading he was getting gold as well. I ran the statistics on him. It was like he was making billions and billions every year. He'd be the richest man in the world even today.
Oh my. So for those of you at home, the question was, where did the Jews get all that gold? And Bobby was pointing out that Solomon taxed the people for one, and he got it from other countries. And according to some reading that you said, that by today's standards, Solomon would have considered to be a billionaire. So he was very rich back in those days. But Jews, somehow acquired some kind of gold while they were in captivity, because as I said, we'll see some of that in just a minute. Lawrence, you had your hand up.
I was just going to say, they just came back out of captivity. So they had nothing. They had nothing.
Yes, that.
They built anything. They probably built it with more resources that were available to them than what Solomon had. Solomon built it out of abundance.
Exactly, Lawrence. So as Lawrence is saying, that when the people came out of captivity, they didn't have anything. And they didn't have the luxuries of going up and chopping down all these trees and all these expensive places. They had to use the rubble that was around them to build this second temple. So no wonder, can you imagine why the older generation is saying, well, wait a minute, this doesn't look like the old temple that we remember. It's not as beautiful. But notice what God says about that. So let's go ahead and read the rest of this. So let's go now to verses 4 through 9. But now, I'm back to Haggai, chapter 2, verse 4. But now, be strong, O Zerubbabel, declares the Lord. Be strong, O Joshua, son of Jehozadak, the high priest. Be strong, all you people of the land, declares the Lord. Work, for I am with you, declares the Lord Almighty. This is what I covenanted with you when you came out of Egypt, and my spirit remains among you. Do not fear. So he's telling them, get going, still work. This is what the Lord, because the Lord is behind this. He still wants them to build this temple. This is what the Lord Almighty says. In a little while, I will once more shake the heavens and the earth and the sea and the dry land. I will shake all nations, and desired of all the nations will come. And I will fill this house with glory, says the Lord Almighty. The silver is mine, the gold is mine, declares the Lord Almighty. The glory of this present house will be greater than the glory of the former house, says the Lord Almighty. And this place I will grant peace, declares the Lord Almighty. The Lord says that this second temple is going to be more glorious than the other, and because of something. It's not going to be because of the gold. What did he say it's going to be because of? Did you catch it? He says it in verse 9. The glory of this present house will be greater than the glory before. Verse 7. Because I will fill this house with glory. It's going to be glorious because God said, because I'm going to be there. That is worth more than all the gold and all the precious stones and all the carvings that Solomon did. It's worth more than all that because the presence of God makes it glorious. So that's what he's telling the old folks. Don't worry about how it looks. My glory will be there because I am there. So this temple will be more glorious because the Lord Almighty will fill this house. So now the Jews start rebuilding, as we have an artist's rendition of the rebuilding of the temple. And now, before the temple was built, the people were supposed to be defiled. And now the temple was rebuilt, and the people will be blessed. So that's now finish out our story. We're now going to read now verse 10 through 19. On the 24th day of the 9th month of the 2nd year of Darius, the word of the Lord came to the prophet Haggai. This is what the Lord Almighty says. Ask the priest what the law says. If a person carries consecrated meat in a fold of his garment, and the fold touches some bread or stew or some wine or oil or other foods, does it become consecrated? The priest answered, no. Then Haggai asked, if a person is defiled by contact with a dead body, touches one of these things, does he become defiled? Yes, the priest replied. It becomes defiled. Then Haggai said, so it is with these people and this nation in my sight, declares the Lord. Whatever they do and whatever they offer, there is defiled. He's talking about before the people started coming back to the Lord, back in the old days, they were defiled because they were disobeying God. But now, notice what happens. Now give careful thought to this from this day on. Consider how things were before one stone was laid upon the other in the Lord's temple. When anyone came to heap up of 20 measures, there was only 10. Anyone went to the wine vat to draw out 50 measures, there was only 20. I struck all the work of your hands with blight, mildew, and hail. Yet you did not turn to me, declares the Lord. From this day on, from this 24th day of the 9th month, give careful thought to the day when the fountain of the Lord, the temple, was laid. Give careful thought. Is there yet any seed left in the barn? Until now, the vine and the fig tree, the pomegranate and the olive tree have not borne fruit. From this day on, I will bless you. So he's saying here that before you started building this temple, you had the curses because you were not doing what you were supposed to do with building the temple. But now that the first stone is being laid, I will start blessing you. So during this time, they're rebuilding the Jewish nation. The people, he says, I'm going to protect you from your enemies. Let's look at as we end this. This is now verse 20. The word of the Lord came to Haggai a second time on the 24th day of the month. Tell Zerubbabel, governor of Judah, and I will shake the heavens and the earth. I will overturn the royal thrones and shatter the power of the foreign kingdoms. I will overthrow chariots and their drivers, horses and their riders will fall, each by the sword of his brother. On that day, declares the Lord Almighty, I will take you, my servant Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, declares the Lord, and I will make you like my signet ring, for I have chosen you, declares the Lord Almighty. So the last point that God is telling them is that you have people that live around you, but I'm going to protect you from them. Their chariots, their swords, whatever they have, don't worry about it. Continue building a temple. I will protect you through this. So the main message of Haggai, you Jews have built your houses and planted your crops. Now get busy and rebuild the house of the Lord. That's his main message. So the lesson of Haggai, what can we learn from that? Well, one, the responsibilities of the Lord come before our own desires and our own economic prosperity. In other words, God told Haggai to tell the people, put God first, and then he'll bless you. And the lesson that we can learn from that is we got to put God first too. You know, we may think, I want to do this, I want to do that, but we got to put God first in everything we do. That reminds me years ago when I was a very, very young preacher in my early 20s, my first preaching job at a church. There was a young couple who was coming to our church, and then they quit coming. So I went to visit them because they had not been in church for a few weeks. And I sat down and talked to him and to the guy, and he said, well, the reason we quit coming to church because I took on a second job. I have to work on weekends. I said, oh, I'm sorry that you have to have a second job to make ends meet. He said, oh, no, that's not the reason I'm having a second job. I want to buy a fishing boat. And so his fishing boat came before coming to worship God. And I always thought, oh, no. He's, that was his God now. He put something before the Lord. Well, this is the point of Haggai. God comes first. Our responsibilities come before our pleasure or what we want. If we put God first, then God will work things out better for our lives. If you were here at the first service, you heard a great lesson about this, how God, when we have anxiety in our lives or whatever troubles us, God will take care of us. We'll just put our trust in Him. So I know you look forward to seeing that. Thank you very much. Enjoyed the class with you. Oh, next week will be Zechariah. So we'll look at that.